record, and we are recording. So this is Joseph Barone, currently the Assistant Scoutmaster, one of the Assistant Scoutmasters with Troop 466, located at St. John the Evangelist, here in Roman Catholic Church, here in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I am interviewing John. Why don't you introduce yourself for those who are listening?
I'm John Mosby Russell, and I'm active in, I'm on the National Capital Area Council Endowment Committee, among other things.
Okay, and what we're going to do today is John is a longtime scouter, long-time scouter in the National Capital Area Council, but also a longtime scouter in general in Scout and Boy Scouts as a whole. And today we're going to talk about his involvement, the starting of how he got involved in the Knights. So, John, why don't you tell us about how you got started in the Knights of Dunamis?
Well, it goes back a lot further than that because several of my uncles were in scouting back at the time of World War I. But I know you want to bring it up currently. And I would like to say this, that scouting has, I first joined the Cub Scouts in Bronxville, New York, when my mother and father and I were living at my grandparents' house. And that was back in 1937. And I marched. I could tell you a little bit more about that, but maybe that's not what you wanted at the moment.
Well, if you want to talk about it, go ahead.
Well, so the Cub Scout, I think we probably had somebody that had military experience in this World War I. And Cubbing was quite new at that time. I think it was started in 1930. This was 1937. And we met on Saturdays, and we hiked every Saturday.
And John, where did you hike? Can you tell me any of the places? Do you remember any of them?
Well, it was all local in Bronxville, New York, which is a suburb in Westchester County. It's not the Bronx, it's north of that. Mm-hmm. And anyway, the Cubs did march in the Memorial Day Parade in Bronxville, New York in 1938. And then I moved to Washington with my parents that summer. And I didn't get into Cubbing right away. There are some reasons that I could tell you, but I don't think we need to record them at the moment.
And John, what was your favorite memory of Cubbing at that time in Bronxville? Do you have a favorite memory?
Well, I pretty much told you what our activities were on Saturdays.
Okay.
We hiked locally, probably a couple of miles, 2 or 3 miles. I mean, we're pretty young kids. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we had dens like they have today. My Cubbing was pretty much on Saturdays, this Saturday hike. Mm-hmm. But as I did already told you, that we marched in the Memorial Day Parade in Bronxville, New York. Now they have, that's where the Kennedys were with the Boy Scouts. So I'm sure that, I mean, my memory is as a Cub is marching in that parade. Okay. But I'm pretty sure, didn't pay much attention to the scout part, but I'm pretty sure they were marching in the same community.
And so you moved down here to Washington, D.C., but didn't get involved right away back into scouting.
I didn't, and for some, and I could tell you personally about that, but I don't think I want to go into it. So we ended up, the National Geographic Society, and I've been a member of that since about that time, life member. They used to have lectures every Friday, about, I think they had about 19 in the fall, 19, 18 or 19 in the, and so, and they were Friday nights, and scouting was on Friday night pretty generally. Most of the troops met on Friday night too. So I didn't get into scouting here for a while, because for about 2 years we did go to the National Geographic lectures on Friday night. And thanks to my mother, my father was a lot older and not quite as understanding. You have to, Southern culture was a little different than the Northern ones. And I know that I think my mother decided that this scouting would be good for me. And she took me up to St. Anne's troop. She insisted that I go, which is one of the best things, of course, that she ever did for me. Well, she did many good things. I don't want to imply anything different in that regard, but it wasn't something that I planned on. And that was in Troop 4, met at St. Anne's Church, and many of the boys in it were at St. Anne's. I went to St. Anne's School, 5th grade, when we came to Washington. But I lived about a mile and a half away, and most of the boys were local, so I really didn't have much involvement with them until I got into the troop. And by the time that I got into the troop, Emil Snellbacher was, I think, senior patrol leader, but a lot of the contemporary boys that would have been in my class had dropped out. Okay. And we started, and that was Pearl Harbor was in 1941, right?
That's correct, December 7, 1941.
Okay, yes, well, this was in the fall of 1940. So I was only in we left, my father worked for the Federal Trade Commission, and he had a business trip where he interviewed clients along the way for the Federal Trade Commission. So almost as soon as I had joined the troop, we were taking this trip, and that was about 3 months. I was in 8th grade, but much of 8th grade for the brighter students in those days used to be repetition. I think they gave me a few things to read, but I recorded the whole trip. That was educational in itself. I can tell you a lot of that trip. So, and I wasn't scouting in that trip. I remember we went all through the power plant at, I guess they called it Hoover Dam at that time, on Sunday, and the following Sunday, of course, it was Pearl Harbor Day. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't have had that experience. I know that I went swimming in December 1st in the Pacific Ocean. That was a big thing for me at that point.
Wow.
My father had a case, and he had cases in a number of places where he had to interview public witnesses and things. So I got to do my mother and I took me sightseeing. She did all the driving. My father was absent-minded. He was a lawyer. He was working all the time. And anyway, we were actually in Los Angeles. I'm trying to think of the boulevard that we were on. We had a motel room for about almost 2 weeks there. And the night of Pearl Harbor, the next morning, my father had a case at the courthouse down in Los Angeles. So I remember that very vividly because people were all lined up to join the service.
Mhm.
President Roseville had addressed the country and so forth. This isn't probably something that you wanted with regard to scouting, but it certainly was ingrained in my mind. And we were in a number of places. We didn't get back home until the middle of January. Do you want to ask me anything in particular there?
No, just keep going.
Well, I'm not sure how much to give you, but
So tell me what it was like when you came back. You were still involved in scouting. When you came back from the West Coast, you were still involved in scouting, correct?
well, I really didn't do any scouting on the trip.
Right.
I was.
But when you returned to Washington,
Yes.
were you involved in scouting when you returned to Washington from the trip?
Well, eventually, my grandmother was quite ill, so we weren't sure that she was going to survive. So within a day of our getting back to Washington, which is the middle of January, we went up to Bronxville, New York, for a week there. So I really didn't, nothing much for scouting started again until I was back in Washington at the beginning of February of 1941. 41, yes.
40. It would have been 42 after Pearl
42.
Harbor. So
42,
okay.
yeah. 42.
So when you returned back to Washington in February of 42, you picked up your scouting activity again?
Yes, and of course, Monsignor Brady, who was just here a little while ago this evening, we were patrol leaders in Troop 4 back at. I mean, he also went to St. Anne's. He was a year behind me, but the two of us were patrol leaders. We had a lot of competition between, and in those days, we were collecting a lot of paper. I know the old building, it used to be an old convent, where St. Anne's Church now, that was all built around afterwards, when I was in 7th and 8th grade. But there was a convent behind, and that was where the scouts met. And each of us, John Brady and I, were patrol leaders. There were just two of us. And we each had our own room. And one of the activities that we did regularly for probably a year and a half, because as part of supporting the war effort, we collected newspapers. And it was competition. I'm glad no fire marshal noticed it, because we filled the rooms, his patrol room upstairs and mine, we had them filled to the ceiling. We would go around in the community with the wagon and so forth, and I guess we let people know that we would do this ahead of time, probably pretty much once a week.
And did you win any sort of awards? Sometimes you see the guy like this award or that award for scrap and paper. And did you receive any of these awards?
I think it was the Eisenhower Medal. I forget exactly what we did to get to that, but there was. You're very correct on that.
And
Go ahead.
and did you collect anything else other than paper, or paper was the main thing?
Well, locally there in the community, that was the main thing. But when I was later, the war went on for several years. And by the time I had transferred down to Troop 56, that met at the Church of the Pilgrims, and I almost dropped out of scouting when I was 15. The fellow that I liked, the older brother, who was an assistant scoutmaster, he went into service within a few months. I can't remember exactly how many months of the time that I started in the troop, and so I used to correspond with him.
Okay.
He had a couple of other brothers, but I did keep in touch with him for quite a time. And Mr. Klein, Adam Klein, his son, he became scoutmaster before I transferred to Troop 56. There's several years in there, this process, because the war lasted, as you know, for about 4 years. I just started with the Pearl Harbor part of it.
And why did you transfer over to the other troop?
Well, I'm in the process of telling you that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And the troop at the Church of the Pilgrims, Herbert Tucker was a scoutmaster, and Mr. Klein, who was acting scoutmaster at St. Anne's Church. I'm not sure how that was set up, but on the Scout Week, we had a joint meeting bowling. The Church of the Pilgrims it's in existence today. It's a very fine place, and they had 2 bowling alleys, which were always available on Friday nights. Most of the troops, as I've already told you, met on Friday night, and they were available after the troop meetings every week to the troops down at the Church of the Pilgrims. Dr. Andrew Bird was the pastor there, and he was very supportive of scouting. Each patrol had their own room, and there was a nice meeting room, and the scoutmaster had a small room, and they also had a library. And those were reserved for the scouts and the scout meetings. Keep me back on track. So anyway, that's how I met Mr. Tucker in the troop, and I was pretty impressed with it, tremendously impressed with it. So that made all of the difference. I didn't drop out of scouting. I transferred. Okay. And there were a couple of other boys, one in my neighborhood that was in St. Anne's Church and also went down there. So the rest of my scouting continued in Troop 56. And Mr. Tucker, he had 2 daughters, no sons. He was scoutmaster for about 25 years, actually. And even when we went to, and I had never gone camping with the troop at St. Anne's Church. I just didn't have confidence in them. I did attend a camporee right near my house along the railroad tracks. That was all woods, and they did have a camporee there. I could walk there as a half a mile from the house. It's all built up now, of course. I did my first class mapping there. I'm sure I still have the map somewhere because I'm not one that throws things out very much. That's something that needs to be taken care of too, because I do have some things that a lot of people would be interested in, the scout-wise, and correspondence later on, which is pretty significant. Getting back, you can keep me on track if you want. I try to.
So you were with this troop for a couple of years. What was your favorite? The new one, yes.
I was with them for a long time. I ended up being assistant scoutmaster. I took them to camp 10 years later or something. So I was with them for a long time.
Well, let's go back to when you joined
right.
this troop. And do you remember a favorite activity, or how can you tell the people who might be listening to this in the future, how different was scouting back then compared to today? Any memories, anything you want to share that was really significantly different? I mean, there are a lot of differences, of course, but something that really sticks out in your mind.
I'm sure after my uncle's experience in Bronxville, New York, was quite different because that was near the end of World War I, and I'm sure they did a lot of things differently than later. But I never went camping with Troop 4. was shy, and I didn't have the confidence in them. And I did do that with, definitely did with Mr. Tucker's troop. I went to camp and all of that. They were a very well organized troop, and the troop did go to camp in the summertime, and I went with them. But he had meetings all summer if for any boys that couldn't go to camp. He had somebody meet with them once a week. So scouting was, he was a very remarkable person.
Do you remember, John, where you went to summer camp? Was it a Boy Scout camp, or was it just somewhere in the woods?
The camp with Troop 56?
Yes.
Yes, it was Camp Roseville. No, we
Oh,
were
okay.
very supportive of Camp Roseville. We had most of the time. Do you remember Camp Roseville?
No, that was way before my time.
Oh, well, most of the campsites there were separate, but they had two of them had the Adirondack, and there was another one that had cabins, open cabins, three open front, but and double deck bunks inside the cabin. I think they held probably eight boys in the cabin, and each. I don't remember whether there were three cabins at each one or not. I think it probably would have been that, because you'd have at least a patrol. That was on top of a hill that overlooked the Chesapeake Bay. Big thing was shark's teeth down there. I guess you can still get them between Breezy Point and North Beach. Camp Roosevelt was probably about 2.5 miles or so from Breezy Point, and we often hiked down there and looked for shark's teeth. That was a big thing. And actually, I remember later when we, quite a bit later, when I was at Catholic University, and we had a retreat down there, and Father Brown, who was our advisor, and I haven't brought him into your story because he didn't appear until much later when I was at Catholic University as a student and was organizing Alpha Phi Omega. But we had a retreat there, and a body washed up in the morning, and this was an old-fashioned retreat that Father Brown conducted, so that it certainly was a memorable situation. One of the boys got up early in the morning, was looking for shark's teeth, and saw the body and came up. If you talk about heaven and hell and all that sort of thing, it's certainly something that I still remember, and I'm sure most people would have a good memory of their scouting activities.
And John, did you go to Camp Roosevelt quite a bit?
Well, once I was in Troop 56, yes.
Yes.
We went almost every year. And as I say, about 10 years later, when I was an assistant scoutmaster, I did take the troop there one year.
So the question I have for you, since I didn't grow up in this area, is how did you get down to Camp Roosevelt? Did they hire a bus? Was there a train and then you hiked from the train? How did you get down there?
Well, it depends on when we were going and for what. I know when we had the retreat down there, I think parents brought, it was by private car, but that was not for the summer camp. And I'm trying to remember I think generally for camp where we're going to be left there for a week or two, a lot of the boys' parents would drive them down.
Okay.
Now that's my personal experience. I'm sure there were different, different troops had different means of communication.
And in those days, John, when you went for summer camp, the troop was responsible for purchasing their food. They didn't do like some of the troops today where the camp
Well, they had
provides
a
you with the
dining,
food.
Camp Roseville had a dining hall.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
they did have a dining hall. And we used the dining hall in the winter when we had the retreat. In the Alpha Phi Omega fraternity that I was with at that point, we actually did the cooking for the boys in the dining hall.
And when you attended summer camp at Camp Roosevelt, how was the food? Do you remember it being good, bad, or you don't remember?
Well, I thought it was pretty good. You could have just about all that you wanted. I think it was about $8 a week
Okay.
fee, as I remember.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had a pitcher of milk, which everybody, you had 8 people at a table typically, 2 on each side. And, well, it's like a patrol, if a troop had a full patrol. And you had a different waiter at each. There was always somebody that went in a little earlier from the troop that was designated. I think that was pretty much on a rotating basis.
Right.
And then during the meal, whoever was, this varied from meal to meal, may have varied with different troops with the way they handled things. But there was somebody designated to go to the kitchen when things were ready to bring out to the table. I mean, if it was a platter of eggs or bacon or whatever it was, or out to get milk pitcher or so forth. The tables got set beforehand, but each table had a designated boy, and that may have varied meal by meal, and there may have been some variations between different troops and how they handled it. But you sent somebody out to get the things to bring them to the table.
Okay. Okay. And
they always had they had grace something like there was a fair amount of singing too. There was often announcements and things at the end before dismissal, and they'd had different ways of dismissing them. I mean, people that had been there the longest, maybe, or verse it gave people a chance to leave for different bases.
and like today, today many times when you get to camp, there's an opening campfire, and at the close of the week, there's a closing campfire. Did they have the same thing at Camp Roosevelt?
Well, they certainly had campfires at Camp Roosevelt. There was and this was pretty much on the top of overlooking the cliff, so it was pretty spectacular situation. And there was an amphitheater where I think when the camp was full in the summer, you probably had about 350 scouts, so that they all could get together, and it was, I don't know how many feet above, but there are cliffs there, so it was up at the top of the cliff, and there was an arena that we marched into, and that was very nice. What would you like to ask me about it?
So here's a question I have. When you go to camp today, during the day you can wear whatever you want, any sort of t-shirt, shorts, whatever. And of course, for dinner, excuse me, for dinner you had to get dressed up and you go to, closing ceremony, all of that. In your day, were you required to wear the scout uniform all day long, or could you wear any sort of t-shirt and shorts?
Not all day long, but we did assemble before going into dinner. We usually assembled. I think they had a flag lowering and maybe announcements and so forth, and typically there may have been exceptions for depending on what the general camp program was at the time, but generally speaking, we were in uniform for that, as I recall.
So very similar then to today, the way many camps are run.
I would think so, yes.
Okay, very good, very good. And so the war continued. You continued on with the troop. Did you turn 18 after the war ended or before the war ended?
I know I was I had a deferral because I didn't graduate from the last semester of my high school. I became 18 and was subject to the draft, but as I say, it was just the last semester, and actually it ended, so I wasn't drafted.
Okay. Okay. And so after you turned 18, what happened with you in Scouts?
Well, I've been in.
Well, you were still with Troop 50, was it 56?
Troop 56, I was, yes.
Yes.
I was
Okay.
with 56, and that was, the war had ended by that time.
Right.
I mean, I was with them. I'd been with the troop about 10 years before I took them to camp in the summer as an assistant scoutmaster. When by that time, Mr. Tucker was nearing the end of. He had another assistant scoutmaster too. But
Okay. So please continue with the troop. And when you took them to summer camp, you took them also to Camp Roosevelt, as you said.
that's for 1 year I did, yes.
When you did. Anywhere else did you take them? Did you take them anywhere else?
Not as a leader. I don't know
Okay.
what else that you might
Okay.
have in mind.
Okay. No, please continue. I was just wondering if maybe you took them to Philmont. I know you went out to Philmont yourself, but I wonder if you took them.
That was late. That was later.
Okay.
The troop one, troop 56, to the best of my knowledge, didn't go to Philmont as a group.
Okay.
Well, Philmont wasn't as. The first time I went to Philmont, I can tell you, that's a whole other part of the story. But it was in 1954. I know that. I was 26 years old. I wanted to. I was in the National Guard, and we always had summer camp, a couple weeks, so I couldn't take the summer off. Mm-hmm. And in 1954, when I was 26, I did take the summer off. And Bob Moore, who was, well, we already had Eagle Scouts and so forth. And he had an Explorer unit over in College Park. And I was in the Explorers at that time too. And Louis Avalere, I was going to take, Bob and I got planned to take the whole summer off. He had been, I think he'd done his graduate work for 2 years. So we both had the opportunity to take the summer off, and we did. And he took one of the boys in his Explorer unit, who happened to, Jock Claggett was his name, and he happened to have been a Senate page in the United States Senate. And that was the year of the McCarthy hearings, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. Maybe you don't.
Well, it was before me, but I know what they were, but it was before me.
Well, normally it was an election year, and normally in an election year, the Senate would adjourn early in the summer so they can go election year, run for office. But this was the year of the McCarthy thing. And Jock was a Senate page, as I told you. He was about 16, maybe 16 or 17. And he was going to go with Bob and myself all summer. And Louis Avalere, he was involved back at St. Anne's Troop. Actually, I think that, and after, there was a time there before Father Brady, Monsignor Brady, went into the seminary where he was sort of an assistant scoutmaster, and I think that Louis Avalere was active at that time. Anyway, in 54, I guess he was 19 because he was in a reserve unit, and he had his 2 weeks of camp, a military camp, was scheduled in mid-June out west. And Bob and I, and well, Jock, as I told you, he didn't start with us because he was involved there at the Senate, and he actually didn't join us until almost the 1st of September. Bob kept in touch with him because he was, he was a boy in his unit.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, when the Senate finally adjourned, which was close to almost the 1st of September, he did fly out to the Tetons where Bob and I and Louis Avalere were by that time. But Bob and myself started out by ourselves. We touched, I know we touched, we went down to Western Florida, I remember that. I had some contact there in the very western part. I know we dipped over into Mexico just to say that we'd been in Mexico. And we were headed to Philmont. And that was very different than what it would be today. You couldn't do what we did that summer, and I want to tell you about it. And Louis Avalere's camp was, what's the town near there? Albuquerque. That's not too far from Philmont. And he was going to be, so Bob and I had our time at Philmont, and then when we knew when Louis Avalere was through his camp, and so we went down to Albuquerque and picked him up after Bob and I had our time at Philmont. But that was quite different. As you may, have you been to Philmont?
No, I've actually never been to Philmont.
Okay. Well, Mr. Wade Phillips, as you know, did give it to the Boy Scouts. And this was in the very early days of the national use of it, as you can understand. And his favorite camp was Rayado. There was no automobile road into Rayado at that time. Of course, later as the Boy Scouts got to use it the way they did, you definitely had a road put in there. But Bob and I did hike in there, and they were using it. But I don't think there was any way to drive in at that time. And the ranger there at Philmont, the scouting person in charge, he had a little cabin at the top of the area of the Rayado camp. Mm-hmm. And it's just Bob and myself. We're all about the same age. We actually spent the night with him in his cabin up there. I don't know that they had any troops or anything as such there at that time. I think we paid $3 a day to be at Philmont, and you don't do that today, you know.
Yeah.
But we were really pretty much on our own, and I guess we must have spent probably about a week there. Mm-hmm. I know we got. I've been to Philmont several times since, so I may keeping them apart, and what we did one time and what we did another when the things were, because I took Eagle Scouts across the country a number of times, the Knights of Dunamis, which they were started in 1925 by Raymond O. Hansen, who was the scout executive, I believe, in San Francisco. And was I already? I guess I knew. I guess I knew about them. Sure, I was, because I was an Eagle. Mm-hmm. That's a whole other part of my life story. I never expected to get Eagle. I was collecting merit badges, farm home and its planning, and all sorts of. I was going to the local board of review. You had to, for every merit badge in those days, you had to go to the local board of review, which met at 34th and Lowell Street. We were in the National Capital Area Council, as you know, and it's one of the larger councils. Mm-hmm. There were a number of districts, but I was in I guess there were two districts in the D.C. area at that time, Northern District and Western James E. West District. I may be a little hazy on some of this, but anyway, our district board of review was at 34th and Lowell Street. Church is still there. And when I started getting merit badges, stamp collecting was my first. It's a hobby I've had, so that was my first merit badge. And I know I had, I think, 44 of them when I got Eagle. I was never really aiming toward Eagle. That's all thanks to Herb Tucker that I've already told you about.
And what were some of the other merit badges that you earned? Can you remember some of them?
Well, sure. Farm home minutes planning. There were a number of badges that you had to have to get Eagle.
Right.
And of course, I got those, but there were some others that they've kind of done away with. I should look at my merit badge stash to tell you. Well, safety was one. First aid, of course, was another. I think you had to have 10 specific ones. There was an alternative for athletics, I think.
Right.
Swim something. Well, I had swimming.
And in those days, you earned Eagle after the age of 18, correct?
That's true. I was in Catholic University when I got my Eagle.
And how old were you then?
Well, I got it, I think it was 1946.
So you were what, about 19, 20?
I was about 19.
Okay. And do you remember your Eagle Board of Review?
I know you'd like me to. I have to. I don't remember specifically at the moment. It may come to me at another.
Okay. And maybe another recording will, you'll remember it and we'll capture it in another recording.
Well, I think we could get a little bit more out of this before.
Sure.
Get through. Maybe better ask me another question.
Sure. No. So why didn't you? I mean, what you said someone encouraged you to get Eagle. You weren't aiming towards it. So what was the impetus? Was it just someone talking to you? Was it?
Well, that of course was Herb Tucker. I would have never gotten Eagle if it weren't for Herb Tucker, and he got me through that. Athletics was one of the things, and that certainly wasn't one of the things that I was skilled in. And I know you had to toss a ball or something. It probably landed. I don't know. Apparently, I did it well enough to meet that particular requirement as part of the athletic merit badge. And he gave me a ring. He gave me an Eagle Scout ring when I did get Eagle, and that was significant in my life. Because you remember that I was at Georgetown Prep, and I never cared about a high school ring, and I was might well have been the only student at Georgetown Prep that didn't get a class ring. And I was at Catholic University, and I never cared about a class ring.
Right.
But Herb Tucker, when I got Eagle, he gave me the ring, the Eagle Scout ring, and I did wear that. And that was an entree to practically everything that happened at Catholic University. Because when I went to Catholic University, I didn't know anybody to speak of. And I was scouting every weekend. Mm-hmm. So I went to school by bus in Westmoreland Circle. There used to be a bus that went between Westmoreland Circle and over in Brooklyn there at Catholic University. So that I studied a lot on that. And I know as a freshman, I had a class at 8 o'clock in the morning or one day a week, and a lab thing from 7 to 10 at night. I know that I made 2 trips on the bus. I didn't always stay at campus all day, on the campus all day. So I remember that very well. But anyway, lot about it, but I'm trying to tell you things that might seem of interest. But anyway, so I was scouting on weekends with my troop and scoutmaster and so forth, going to training, started taking training courses with him. As I was an adult, juniors, I was an assistant scoutmaster by that time.
And can you tell us about the training courses you took?
Well, there was one that I think had 12 parts, and it was leading up to, there was one for scoutmasters and or adult scouters, and I got about half of those, and then I didn't continue. But that was my weekend thing, very regularly for a while.
And where did you attend these classes? Did you have to go somewhere? Or did you just were they self-study?
Well, now, which classes are we speaking about?
These are these.
For merit badges, I went all over the city.
No. When you became an assistant scoutmaster and you were taking these classes, like to be a leader, like scoutmaster, etc., where did you take these classes?
I'm trying to think.
If you don't remember, that's okay.
Yeah, I at the moment I don't remember.
But these were in-person classes, so you would go somewhere and someone would be teaching you.
Yes.
Okay.
So, with my scoutmaster, we were both taking them, and well,
now I got you thinking.
You got me thinking, but also there's quite a bit that I could that you probably would be interested in if I could keep it coordinated.
So, you know what I think we're going to do, John? We've been on for a good 45 minutes so far, maybe a little more. I think what I'm going to do is end it for tonight, if that's okay, because I have to go to work in the morning.
Oh, well, I can appreciate that on your part, and I plan to stay up most of the night anyway, so that's no problem here.
And what I'd like to do is maybe give you a call, maybe Friday night, if you're available.
Well, at this point, generally speaking, I mean, things do come up that I don't know about ahead of time.
Sure. So let me plan on giving you a call on Friday night. If we can talk, we can continue on the conversation, your memories about, you as a scout and maybe getting into the Knights or National Catholic Committee on Scouting or whatever you want.
The eagle ring is important because I was wearing that in the Latin class at Catholic University when Frank Levine, who was an Eagle Scout, and I can elaborate on that, but keep that in mind. He saw the ring, and he said, "Isn't there some sort of a scouting organization?" And that just remember that part, and that'll.
I'll remember the thing about the eagle, and Frank Levine.
And the ring. That's
in the ring, of course. Yes.
Okay.
The ring and Frank Levine. Okay. So John, we'll end this today.
Fine.
I want to thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome.
I'll give you a call on Friday night then.
You're the one that doesn't. I mean, I could go along probably for several hours if you want, but I know you don't want to. So I think this is a good stopping point.
It's a good stopping point, yeah, because I've got to get ready for work. So I'm going to stop recording.
That'll get me going.